Hi, I'm Megan from Fresh Off the Grid, and a while back I got to travel to the Olympic Peninsula to shoot a short film with She Explores and Columbia Sportswear. That film was just released, so I'm going to link to it in the description below if you want to check it out. So a bit of the backstory. Gail, who's the founder of She Explores and host to a podcast of the same name, and Heidi Annalise, who is an artist out of Denver, Colorado, and I got to backpack for a couple of days on the Makah tribal land on the Olympic Peninsula. And on that trip, I cooked all of us a meal. And so I thought I would share the recipe with you today in case you wanted an easy meal to make on your next backpacking trip. All right, so let's get started. I don't usually backpack with a frying pan, but I'm going to use one today just because it's going to be easier for you to see everything going on in here. So let's just go with that. But know that you can cook this in basically any pot that you'd usually bring backpacking. So to get started, I'm going to put about 2 cups of water into this pan. All right, so now I'm going to add some dried mushrooms. I have this Northwest mix, which has a bunch of different mushrooms like morels and chanterelles and lobster mushrooms. They're going to add a lot of great color and texture to the dish. And if you can't find this exact, package, you can use basically any type of dried mushrooms. All right, so that's about a ½ ounce of dried mushrooms. You can do more if you want. So I'm going to simmer these until they are mostly cooked through and nice and tender, because the soba is actually going to cook very quickly. So we want to make sure that these are almost good to go before we add the rest of our ingredients. So the base of the broth that I'm going to cook the soba noodles in is just soy sauce, toasted sesame oil, powdered garlic and ginger, which I mixed at home and put into a small container like this. The only thing I'll say about this is you want to make sure that you use a container that has a really great seal, because you don't want to have to deal with an oily mess if this leaks. That may or may not have happened to me on the actual trip, and that's just because I decided to use a cheaper container, so lesson learned. So this is looking pretty good. These mushrooms are starting to get pretty tender, so we're going to go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients. So I'm going to start with our broth base. Just going to go right in here. And now I'm going to add the soba. So I'm not usually picky about the ingredients that I use in my backpacking meal, but I will say that for these soba noodles, you really want to go with one that is a blend of wheat flour and buckwheat flour. I've used 100% buckwheat noodles in this dish before, and they really don't work because of the way that we're cooking it. They just sort of fall apart and just kind of are a mess. So you want to make sure that you're going to use noodles that are kind of half and half, because these are going to cook up really nice and stay firm. All right, so I'm actually going to break these in half so that it's easier to stir them around. All right, so we're just going to cook these until they're tender, and that will depend on the actual noodles that you use. For the ones that I'm using, it's going to be in the ballpark of 4 minutes or so. So on our hike, we got to forage for sea rocket, which is kind of like a wild arugula that one of our crew members, Jason, who's a local to the area, showed us. It was great because it added a little bit of like a spicy kick to the dish and some great color, but obviously it's not a requirement. If you're into foraging, you can forage for some local greens if you want to incorporate that, or you could use something like a dried spinach, or in this case I dehydrated some arugula at home, and I'm just going to throw it in at the end here to kind of rehydrate it. So this is looking pretty good, so I'm just going to turn off the heat, and now we're going to add the salmon. So Gail, Heidi, and I were given some really fantastic kippered salmon by a local chef. I wish I could take that on every backpacking trip because it was so good. but that's not always possible. So instead I'm going to be using this smoked salmon that comes in a little pouch. This is great for backpacking because it's super packable, it's shelf stable, and it's pretty versatile. So these salmon pouches can really vary in quality. There's some junk ones out there and there's some really high-end expensive ones. This one's kind of like in the middle, so it'll work for this dish pretty well. So I'm just gonna open this and just flake it right over the top, and it will kind of warm up with the residual heat from the dish. All right, so then you can just top it with some chili flakes and sesame seeds. If you want to pack those in a separate baggie. You could also pack this in a bag with the Soba noodles and just have them cooking in the broth the whole time along with the noodles. So I've included a full write-up of this recipe with all of the ingredients and the quantities down in the description if you're interested in making this meal yourself. If you do make it, let me know. I'd love to hear about what you thought. Thanks again to She Explores and Columbia Sportswear for what was a really fun shoot. That video that we shot is also linked in the description, so check it out if you're interested. And if you want more backpacking meals, we have a bunch of them on our website at freshoffthegrid.com, and we hope that you check them out. Thanks for watching.